Somebody left this 20-pound Bible up here. That's a big old Bible.
Very large.
Well, it's pastor appreciation, and I want to talk about a pastor that passed away. Where's Jeff? Jeff isn't in here? Because I think he would enjoy this. He'll be back in a minute. Pastor passed away and was standing in line at the gate. And St. Peter was interviewing people as they come in. And he noticed that he was handing out wings and a new car and a robe to everybody that came through. So he started chatting up with the guy in front of him. And he said, "What did you do?" And the guy said, "Well, I was a taxi driver in New York for years." He said, one in every crowd. He said, "I'm just surprised I'm here." And the guy said, "Well, I was a pastor for many, many years, and I'm excited to see what I get." So the taxi driver gets up there, and he gets silk wings, and he gets a golden Bentley and a beautiful satin robe. And the pastor thought, man, this is going to be good. And the pastor got up there, and he got a sackcloth, and he got old bird wings, and he got this little beat-up used car. And he said to St. Peter, "I don't understand." He said, "The guy in front of me, his gifts were beautiful compared to mine." And he said, "Well, here in heaven, we go on results." He said, "When you preached, everybody slept. When the taxi driver drove, everybody prayed."
That's a good one. That is a good one.
That one did not come out of the book that I received as a gift from somebody in this church. That was one I went out and got on my own. Family, I'll tell you. The 23rd Psalm, we are racing through it. This is what, our 5th Sunday, I think, on it. We are really plowing through this thing fast. The Lord is my shepherd. The Lord is my shepherd. I have all that I need. He lets me rest in green meadows. He leads me beside peaceful streams. He renews my strength. He guides me along right paths, bringing honor to his name. Well, so far, everything's talking about what the Lord has done for us or will do for us. Now he gets a little personal here in verse 4. He says, "Even when I walk through the darkest valley, I will not be afraid, for you are close beside me." So he's changing the narrative a little bit. He's not just talking about God and what God does as shepherd, but he's saying, I will not be afraid. Why am I not going to be afraid? Because I know who my shepherd is. I know who walks beside me. You know, I did a little bit of studying up on sheep. I never really understood why they talk about summer grazing and winter grazing, but sheep are often taken to the mountains to graze on the lush, high elevation pastures that become available during the summer months, allowing them to access a fresh food source while also giving the lower pastures time to replenish. This practice is called transhumus, and is a traditional method of managing livestock in mountainous regions. Now, of course, I wouldn't have known most of this because I've never really lived in a mountainous region, not what they're talking about here anyway. But they talk about the fact that when the snow melts on the mountaintops, there's all this lush green. And so they take them up to this greenery and they give the valleys time to heal, the valleys time to grow. But you know what's interesting is you have to go through the valley to get to the mountaintop. I mean, think about that for a second. He just doesn't pick them up and carry them up to the top of the mountain. They have to travel through the valleys to get there. So the question is, what awaits them in the valleys? Well, we know in the valleys, that's where there's plenty of water. There's rivers flowing. There are lush fields down there. And it gives them everything that they need. In this book, he talks about the fact that on his ranch, he had a couple of guys come through with 10,000 sheep. Now, can you imagine someone coming across your property with 10,000 sheep? I don't even know what 10,000 sheep would look like. I mean, it's It's a lot, but I couldn't even imagine. And they asked if they could allow their sheep to replenish their water in the river that flowed through his property. And he said, absolutely. He said, and it was amazing because the second the sheep were let loose and they saw the waters, he said they went running to the rapids just to get a drink. He said you could tell that they had been waiting on something good, something that was nourishing. In other words, they had been traveling, they were tired, and they couldn't wait to get to the water. So in this valley, they found water. They found lush plains that they could eat from. But yet he says in here, even when I walk through the darkest valley. So what was so dark about the valley if they're getting everything that they need? Well, if you've ever been deep down in a valley, now I didn't grow up in the mountains, but I grew up in the hills. And if you've ever been down in the deepest part of the valley, it gets dark quicker. The shadow starts to come over the land, and everything just seems to change briefly. And when a storm's rolling in, you could almost feel it and see it before it gets there. In the valley, there are chances of the plains flooding when it rains. There's really no cover when it storms. You have to run for cover. You have to find a place to go. Now, that's just the weather. But see, it seems like all the predators also live in the valleys. In fact, the predators lay wait for the sheep as they come through, and the shepherd has to defend them. He has to take care of them. He has to know that they're around. You know, people say it was a miracle that David slayed the giant with a rock and a sling. But think of how many wild animals he had to do that to before he ever got to the giant, before he ever got to Goliath. In other words, David had to walk through valley after valley after valley, protecting those who are most precious to him, before he could get to the point where he could fight the man who was causing so much trouble for the people that he loved. In other words, God had prepared him in all those valleys to do what needed to be done. You see, the shepherd already knows the valleys. He already knows where he's taking them. A shepherd has already been where he's planning to take his sheep. In other words, a shepherd's not just going out and discovering new land and letting his sheep go without knowing what it is. Nowhere has a sheep gone that the shepherd hasn't already been there before. It takes months and months to scout out the route that they want to take and that they want to put their sheep on. They have to know where they can find water source. They have to know where they can find food. And they have to know where they're running into the most danger when it comes to predators. So in other words, a shepherd has to be prepared. It's not unlike what we face today. You see, our shepherd has been everywhere that we could possibly ever think to go. There's nowhere we can go that he hasn't already been. So what does our valleys look like? Well, when I look at my valleys, and I thought a lot about this week, we've had a lot of ups and downs in our life, a lot of valleys. But let me start by saying this. You can't get to the top of the mountain without having going through the valley at some point. Too many people get in the valley and they say, woe is me, I can't believe it. And they get stuck. They don't know where they're going because they're not looking at the shepherd, they're looking at the situation in the valley. It's easy to get focused on what's pulling you down and not focusing on what can pull you out. So many people in their valleys, they experience death, lies, cheating, scandals. I could go on and on. We could talk about all sorts of things that we experience in the valleys. All the pains, all the hurts that you can imagine. And here's the thing. They don't just happen when we're non-Christians. Most of you probably can tell us stories about the things that you've went through since you've been a Christian. You see, Christians are not excluded from the valleys. The difference is that we have a shepherd who will lead us through if we will watch and pay attention to what he is showing us. Amen. Because he's been there. He knows where he's taken us. Too many times we get impatient and we think the Lord's doing nothing. I need to do it on my own. Well, good luck with that. Because where the shepherd's trying to take me, I have not been yet. Have I been to a mountaintop? Yes. But I've not made it to the final mountaintop. And only he knows the path to that. I just have to follow. He leads and I follow. That's what the rule is. Unfortunately, for most of us, we try to carve out our own path. And we never make it to the mountain. How many people do you know who have been sitting in the dark valley for years, just wishing somebody would come along and help them? And the reality is, there has been many people who have tried to help them over the years. But they weren't listening because all they could focus on was what was happening to them at that moment. Don't get me wrong, when we're going through our valleys, it's tough. It's tough to see what's happening. It's tough to see how you can get out of it. But the reality is, we were never meant to stay in the valley because everything that we need is on that mountaintop at that moment if we'll just go. If anybody here has ever been through Emmaus, it's a thing that people go on a weekend retreat, and they talk about the mountaintop high that you get from going on that retreat. Now, I used to laugh at people that went on Emmaus because personally, those people kind of annoyed me a little bit. You know, somebody that finds something and they're the only ones that know. They found that hidden gem in Cartersville, one restaurant that nobody knows about. And they're like, let me tell you something. I found something nobody knows about. And then they tell you and you're thinking, I've been eating there for years. Well, that's how Emmaus was. People would go on Emmaus weekend and they come out and they go, oh, if you've never been, I don't even know how you have a relationship with Jesus Christ. You can't, if you've not been to the mountaintop, well, you just don't know what you're missing. You must not know Jesus the way I know Jesus. And I have to explain to them that there's more than one mountaintop. A mountaintop can happen anywhere where you have come through the valleys, you have made it to the other side, and you have gotten to the top of the mountain. It doesn't have to be Emmaus, although I did go on an Emmaus walk eventually, and it was wonderful. But it's just one of many mountaintops. It's not the mountaintop. In fact, I would argue that when someone is going through death, when my dad was going through his process of dying, it was a 4-day process where he was shutting down. There was such a peace about that. Even though we were in the valley and it was dark, there was a peace because we knew that there was a mountain just at the end of this valley and that he was headed to that mountain. You see, if we're Christians, the valley doesn't last forever. The valley is temporary until we get to the other side and we start up the mountain. Now, maybe for those left behind, the mountain wasn't quite the same. But I think for my father, it was a mountain that he had never been on before, and it was the greatest thing that he had ever seen in his life. You see, we can go through all sorts of trouble in our lives. I think in my life, and I think of all things that I've been through, I've probably been through more valleys as a Christian than I was as a non-Christian. But I also know that with every valley comes a mountaintop. And when I make it through there, I know it's going to be amazing. It's going to be wonderful. You know, being a pastor has the same thing, or being a church employee at all has the same thing, right? We have our ups and our downs. You might catch me on a day where I'm in a valley, but that's okay because guess what? God's bringing me out of that to the mountaintop. Now, here's our responsibility as Christians. We are not the shepherd. God is the shepherd. But we can be a shepherd's assistant. How many people do you know right now who are going through a valley who need help, who need an encouraging word, who needs a hand, who needs someone just to listen? In other words, they don't want to walk through the valley alone. They know God is there, but they want someone holding their hand as they go through. Well, for anybody here that's ever been through a valley, and that should be everybody here, if you've never been through a valley, talk to me and tell me your secrets later. Because I don't know anybody that hasn't been through a valley. So if you've been through one, you now are capable of helping people through theirs. Do you understand that? Do you realize that? For someone who has walked through something, we want to find somebody who has also walked through that so that they can be there with them. When my father passed away, I felt comforted by people who also had their fathers or mothers pass away, who would talk to me and tell me, it's going to be okay. You're going to miss them. But you and I both know as Christians where they're at, right? In other words, they were encouraging me. They were lifting me up. They were telling me it's time to get up out of the valley and get onto the mountain. How many of you today are walking in a valley and you could feel it? It's beating you up. It's tearing you down. You wake up every morning tired and frustrated. Maybe there's fear in your heart. You don't know what's going to happen next. Well, guess what? Neither do I. Because a crystal ball was not issued to me, nor was it issued to you. That's where faith comes in. In my darkest hours, I have to be able to get down on my knees, and I have to be able to trust the one who created me, and know that while the valley seems dark, while it seems like the storms are coming down hard and the flood is rising and I have no path to get out of it, the shepherd's over there waving me, telling me, come on, it's right here. Here's where you need to go. This is the path to the mountain. There was probably a good year where Carol and I didn't go to church. We were going through a really rough valley. Not between the two of us, just circumstances in life. And I talked about this last week. We can get in a rut, we can get in a habit, and then that habit just grows. It started off me being angry and saying, I'm not going today. And then the next Sunday, I'm still angry, I'm still not going. By the time the month was up, I didn't know if I was still angry, I just didn't want to go. And it took almost a year before I realized I was in a valley of my own making. I was walking in a valley that I created. God did not intend for me to be in that valley. But you see, I learned some things along the way. I learned to not be so sentimental when church people act like the world. Talking about that this morning, weren't we? You know, at the school, and by the way, the man that I talked about last week, I told him, I said, I talked about you in my sermon. He goes, oh, did you? And I said, yeah, about how you haven't been to church. He goes, oh, man. He said, you're right. He's not here today, so I'll let him know again tomorrow that I'm still talking about him. But he's doing the same thing. He's walking in a valley that he has created. God doesn't intend for him to be in that valley, but he doesn't know how to get out of it. You see, one day led to the next, it led to the next, it led to the next. In other words, he's not on a righteous path being guided by God. He's on his own path and he's lost. As someone who grew up on a farm and grew up in the woods, I can tell you as a kid, one of the scariest things is to walk deep enough into the woods that all of a sudden you don't recognize anything around you. And you have no idea where you're at and you have no idea how to get back to where you came from. And a panic starts to set in because you think you're probably going to live there forever. You know, when you're 9, 10 years old, that's what you feel, right? You're like, I'm never getting out of here. I'm going to be the lost boy. People will talk about me for centuries. No one can find me. And then eventually you see something that you recognize. God gives you a sign and you find your way out. I went on a property one time hunting and this guy said, it's real easy. I'll take you back to the stand. And when you come back, all you have to do is hit the railroad tracks and then just walk east. I said, it sounds good to me. I said, I can do that. And when I came back out, there was snow on the ground, about a foot. But that's okay, because I knew I would still feel the tracks when I was walking. Here's what he didn't tell me. There was also a tunnel that the tracks went in. And I was walking over the tunnel. And I never found the tracks. And I just kept walking and walking. I was lost. I couldn't find my way out. And an hour later, I ended up in some town I'd never heard of. And some guy looked at me. I'm standing there holding a gun, wearing an orange vest, and he said, you look lost. I said, really? What gave that up? And he said, do you need to ride back to where you came from? I said, yes. He goes, where's that? I said, I don't know. I said, it's in the woods somewhere, but I don't know where I parked my truck because I don't know where I'm at. He said, well, do you have a name for me? I said, I do. And I gave him the name, and he said, I bet I know exactly where you parked your truck. You see, when we rely on the one that knows, it's so much easier to get back to where we're supposed to be. But we tend to rely on ourselves because we think we have all the answers. Stop playing around in the valley that you are creating for yourself. And know that you have a God who never intended for you to stay in that valley. That valley is intended to teach lessons, intended to bring you along the way. Now, that said, how many of you have ever been in a valley and look back and you can see the blessings that God laid on your life while you were in that valley? You see, a valley is not just the bad things. Valleys are also there to teach us lessons. Valleys are also there to help us grow closer to God. I've heard people say, well, I gave up on God and I was in this deep, dark pit, this valley. And because it got so bad, I didn't know what else to do, so I just cried out to him. And my relationship grew stronger every day in that valley. And before I knew it, I was no longer in the valley, I was on the mountaintop. That's how it works. See, God blesses those who go through the valley. Just like the sheep were able to find water in the valley. They were able to find lush fields in the valley. Yes, there's dangers. Yes, there's troubles. But if we know the shepherd, we will fear no evil when we're in those valleys, because he will protect us from those things. And he will bring us out of it just the way he intended and bring us to the mountaintop where we were supposed to be all along. This 23rd Psalm that David wrote, I never looked at it as close as I'm looking at it now. And it's got to be one of the most beautiful things that I have ever read in Scripture. Because as a shepherd, he truly understood how important his role was to care for his sheep. And the way he correlates that to how God takes care of us, it's amazing. God takes us and leads us to our own valleys. And some of you in here have had some rough valleys this year. Some of you are still going through your valleys, and it's tough. But God says, I have you. Yes, you're going to walk through this valley, and it's going to be painful, and there are some things you're not going to like. But when you come out on the other side, you will be better for having walked through it. Take a minute and just think about the valleys in your life that you have went through in the past. Now think about the blessings that you received from those things. Some of those things you may not have been able to see at the time, and it seemed like that the whole world was against you. But looking back, you say, man, God knew what he was doing. Because I thought that I was just doomed, and I had all this pity that I was throwing on myself, and I was frustrated and I was angry, and I wanted to tell people exactly what I thought. But I held my tongue, and I'm glad I did, because God taught me and showed me something important during those struggles. And they could have been overshadowed or not even seen at all had I just went off the way that I wanted to go off. But because I had patience, because I stood by, God was able to do what God does. I won't say that I enjoy going through valleys. I don't think anybody does. But I can say this, I understand that they're necessary to get to the mountaintop. And man, when you get to that mountaintop, you are seeing things that you've never seen before. Now, if you're saying here today, well, I've never been to a mountaintop, well, there's a problem. As a Christian, if all you've ever been is in the valley, then we've got to get you out of there. I mean, I can't personally get you out of the valley, but I can walk alongside of you as God does it. Because every Christian should be able to get out of the valley. Every Christian should be able to get to the mountaintop. And if you can't, then something's wrong. I'm not saying it's your faith, but we were never intended to live in the valley. We were meant to just pass through on our way to the mountaintop. Let's pray.